training them.
Did everyone get the updated syllabus?
Yes.
Jonathan? Jen, you got the updated syllabus? Okay. Any questions? You want me to go through it? Does anybody have questions about it? Hello?
So far, not so far.
Updated syllabus.
Pulling it up as we speak.
Okay, so today we're doing domestic violence, which is the custody of bond and some of the questions on domestic violence. And for Thursday, I reordered and also taken out some cases that were on your CD. So for Thursday, you guys are gonna read it. I want you to read it in the order that I have it in the new syllabus. So the Eleanor, Carlos, Jennifer, Mikhail, and Martha cases. Then the Mass General Laws 233, 81, 82, 83, that deals with out-of-court statements of children under 10 in sexual abuse cases. The cases grouped with that statute are cases that deal with that particular statutory, it's an exception to hearsay, and then some of the criminal sexual abuse cases. So I've grouped them differently than the way that they were ordered on the original syllabus, and I also actually deleted a few of the cases on the original syllabus. Any questions about that? Yeah. So we'll go through those cases on Thursday, and I've handed out, and I'll actually leave extra copies for the online people, the child sexual abuse assignment, and we'll actually assign roles for you guys, and we're probably gonna start that role playing next week on Tuesday. So really, all the cases that you have to read, we'll go through them, you know, as quickly as we can on Thursday, so you understand what they stand for. And then Thursday, the next Tuesday, the 4th, we'll actually conduct the hypothetical exercise, which is the packet I just handed out. And the only reading that you then have to do is the two articles on role of counsel for children. So next Thursday, we're gonna deal with medical neglect. And I'm not sure yet what I'm gonna do with mental health issues. I took it off the syllabus for now. And that takes us to the week after spring break. And again, I reordered that a little bit as well. The LGBTQ youth issues, we're gonna deal with that later on in week 12. And I think that was the only change. And after that, it follows as the original syllabus did. So let's start with the domestic violence case that we have, the bond case. Everybody pull it up? Let's discuss the facts of bond first. Anyone? John?
Sure. This is the case, it was in '95, and the probate and family court awarded shared legal custody and primary physical custody to the father. The SJC held that awarding primary physical custody without making findings on the fact of domestic violence issues constituted reversible error, and the same thing as far as shared custody. The parents were arguing that each one were violent toward each other and abusive. And there was
So
two-
can you tell us a little bit about the history of their relationship?
Yeah, you got Leslie and Ross.
Mhm.
They met in '77. Leslie was twice divorced, lived with 2 children, 9 and 5, Laura and John.
So she already had children when she met Ross?
Yep.
Yep.
He was a bigger gentleman. He was 6'5", 280 pounds, I think, and she was a small woman, 5'7", 150. They were both either used or abused alcohol and marijuana. They both were abusive towards each other. Their daughter Carrie stated that the father abused the mother when she was a baby.
What specific instances did the SJC relate from the case below? Specific instances of abuse?
Specifically, as far as Ross's abuse towards Leslie.
Okay, start with Ross, yep.
What did he do? I believe he sexually, let me give me a second. Well, I know she was taunting him and provoking him, allegedly, and he was, I don't remember if he was sexually abusive or just like a batterer.
So what particular, Jonathan, what particular battering incidents?
I think he
Correct.
physically assaulted her and he knocked her unconscious. I think there was something there about knocking her unconscious.
He knocked her unconscious and she had to be hospitalized?
Yes, she did.
Okay, yeah, so at least one that we know of, at least a trip to the emergency. Joe?
Well, he was mentioning the sexual assault, it was with the stepdaughter. It was with not his daughter, but her daughter.
What did stepdaughter mention? And she mentions it years later, right?
When she became a teenager.
What was her allegation?
Specifically that he had, this was sexual assault, but specifically that he'd come down to her, kissed her on the mouth in an inappropriate manner, and touched her body in an inappropriate sexual manner.
Okay. What other incidents of Ross on Leslie? Amanda?
Mary put the unconscious one, right?
Yep.
Wasn't it like,
So we know there's one hospitalization. What other instances of domestic abuse that we know about from the record? Joe?
He inflicted injuries upon her on numerous occasions, it says, and
Mhm.
that the stepchildren witnessed a number of incidents when he would go into rages.
Children witness?
And,
Okay.
yeah, and that the testimony findings of fact reflected that Ross was also physically and verbally abusive towards the children.
What else about Joe?
There was, the police were called on a dozen occasions.
Okay, yeah. So we have police reports as part of the record. What else?
a 209A?
How many 209As?
Was it 2 or 3? That she had filed?
Okay.
To keep him away?
Mhm.
Just trying to know.
And what else do we know about Leslie herself?
She was a drug user? Next to
Laura?
She assaulted Ross in a sexual and humiliating manner. And some of the taunting was within the voice hearing. So
What do we know specifically about Leslie and her personality and her upbringing and her prior relationships? Laura?
She was abusing, definitely abused in her prior relationships, but I think as a child as well. Yes, she was abused as a child.
Anything else? Did we cover everything? Yeah.
Well, it doesn't prove abuse. It's just
What's
like
that?
the fact that she was the caretaker of Vaughn until it was five.
So they have a kid, Vaughn,
Yeah.
right? And so they're living together with her 2 kids, Vaughn as well. And in what, who's working, what's that relationship like, Joe?
Well, changes. I mean, she
Mhm.
said she gets a better job.
Yeah, yeah.
And she becomes the breadwinner, and then that's when he became the primary caretaker of Vaughn, you know,
Mhm.
feeding him, you know, driving him places, taking him to the stores. Yeah, so she wasn't playing as much of a role as.
Yeah, yeah, she becomes the breadwinner, and Dad is overseeing Vaughn's daily activities, okay. So how does the case commence in probate and family court? What's the reason for case getting filed, John? You started to describe that.
Sorry, what was the
earlier.
question?
How does the case commence in the
In
probate?
probate,
court? Yeah.
he's awarded primary custody.
How, yeah, but how? Who starts an action? What, parties weren't married, correct?
Well, the father brought the action
For what?
to determine the custody,
What's that?
to see who gets custody of the child. And,
But what kind of a case, what kind of a complaint was filed? He's
uh,
asking for custody, so that's something you ask for, but within the context of, so this isn't like, up until now, you've been looking at care and protection cases, so this is different, right?
Yeah, that the wife was violent.
No, what was the complaint that was filed? The petition, Joe?
Wasn't he trying to establish paternity?
Yeah, yeah. So within that context, then he's also asking for custody, right? Okay. Case goes to trial. And having heard all these facts that you guys just mentioned, right? Jim, what does the court decide? The trial court first.
The trial court had granted custody to Ross.
To Ross. Now, why do you think, before we get to, ultimately it goes up to the SJC, and when there's, the SJC mentions the gender bias study and all this stuff about domestic violence and, what court should do in the future, but why do you think that the judge awarded custody to Ross? Amanda?
Because he was the primary caretaker at that time, possibly, like he spent most of his time with Vaughn.
Joe?
Because of Dr. Abrazizi.
Because of what?
Dr. Abrazizi.
Okay, who was he and what did he?
He was a clinical psychologist that the parents had both agreed would be appointed guardian ad litem
Mhm.
because he previously consulted with the child,
Yeah.
and he was going to make an evaluation regarding the custody. And when he did make his evaluation, he recommended that joint custody remain, but that the boy be placed with the father, because I think that he felt that their relationship was endearing, he warmed up to their close bond, I guess. So that played a role in the way that the doctor felt, and the way that the doctor felt.
What's really, yeah, but think about too, what's really underlying all of this? So the case is going through, he files his petition, then there's property motions, there's the appointment of the doctor. Case goes to trial, obviously a heated custody case. Both parents are parties and, they're appearing, knowing what you know about domestic violence, about the dynamics of batterers and victims. How are you supposed they presented themselves at trial? Because what does a trial judge do? A judge, amongst other things, observes the demeanor, right, of witnesses. So how did she present herself versus how did he present himself? And does that have anything to do with the, the dynamics of what was going on? You're nodding like.
Well, yeah, I mean, if she's looking at this as she's gonna lose her son, she's probably out of control. I mean, just based on, that she had been violent in the past. I mean, I would just think if she was thinking there was a chance she's gonna lose her son, she probably wasn't as in control as maybe she might have been, so.
Who's the person that's usually in control in a domestic violence relationship, Amanda?
Normally it's a man. But-
No, I'm just saying the person is normally the batterer, whether it's a
Oh.
man, a woman, or
Yeah.
gay, straight, whatever the relationship is, correct? So let's talk about the control factor first. know what, you know, the reading of the case and maybe, you know, trying to read the underlying facts as well. In what context, how does Ross fit the batterer's profile? How does Leslie fit the victim profile? How does Vaughn fit the children's profile, of children who have witnessed or been, you know, to domestic violence? Jonathan?
As far as Ross fitting the batter's profile, 6'5" to 80, it's a change with an explosive attitude. He's like a, you know, angry guy, so, you know, stereotypical woman beater, I guess, if you could say that.
Who else wants to add to that? Joe, you had your hand up too a minute ago, I don't know. No, you didn't? Okay.
I didn't.
Okay.
No.
What else about
Didn't
Ross?
she come back, like, well, Leslie, didn't she leave and come back and leave and come back? Wasn't there a pattern of that?
Okay. But what about Ross's personality and relationships with the children, with Leslie?
With the controlling thing, I know that he kind of held it over her head that he would try to take Vaughn away, but if she left.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that he was very controlling over his kids' lives. It said that on the surface that everything looked okay, but he was very controlling over them. And like with regards to the sports, and then something about, you know, showering together, inappropriate relationship with Vaughn. But also, you said with Vaughn, he had an affection toward his dad. It seemed like more concern for his welfare, so there was an inappropriate role reversal. Usually that comes from families with abuse. So that's how he was kind of showing his role as a victim of abuse by having this concern for his dad's welfare, and that's kind of, even though that he knew that that was a bad guy.
Yeah, yeah. And what about Leslie?
She was
Stephanie?
in,
Oh, I'm sorry.
she was in 2 abusive relationships prior to that, and the judge used Dr. Jaff's testimony to conclude that like a child raised by a person that's been in abusive relationships will likely be abused himself. So.
Well, I give you guys a handout. If you look at page 5, there's a 2 columns of user victim. Any other examples relative to Ross and Leslie?
Leslie, that's the mother, right? I'm just gonna.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, she could fit into the victim category, but like, she still was like antagonizing him and doing little things back to him, like abusing him, like it was just the 2 of them abusing each other.
Stephanie, you look like you want to say something.
I don't know, it seems more like, the frantic and more control would fit her behaviors. That's what I was thinking just now.
Is that what, I'm sorry, does that?
Being frantic and more control. It's like there's a concern. I think the thing that keeps bringing me to like a red flag with her is that her previous relationships have been also abusive. Which it could mean that she just tends to, it could be like attachment issues of the same type of familiarity with that type of relationship that comforts her.
So what are some of the personality characteristics of the victims, Jen?
I was going to say that I think they kind of switch roles back and forth. Like, I think she does play the victim in a lot of what happened, but I also think she plays the abuser too. they tend to turn into the abuser. Does that make sense? After a period of time. And they're so used to the abuse that they don't realize that it becomes a part of them. It becomes a part of their personality to just, yeah.
So there's a theory of domestic violence, and it was led by Dr. Lenore Walker, and that's these power and control wheels that I've given you guys. And, you know, the theory is that and whether it's violence, because, you know, some of the other issues, and they're the most difficult ones when there really isn't violence per se in terms of physical, but there is still control. But in terms of the cycle, you know, some sort of building up and escalation. And some have said that victims will sometimes incite this violence as well, to sort of, you know, for lack of a better word, get it over with. And then the violence happens. So for example, one of Leslie's hospitalizations, or the 209 days of police getting called, then after that, the, you know, abuser becomes, you know, gee, forgive me, you know, flowers, roses, et cetera, gifts, et cetera, the honeymoon phase. And then, you know, things start to get progressively worse and worse. There's more control, there are more power issues, and then another incident occurs. That's one theory, Dr. Walker. There's another theory, and I can't remember who the professionals involved are, whereas Dr. Walker's is cyclical and there's periods of calm. Another theory is that it's more like a straight line, that the abuser is always totally in control. And even when the abuser looks like he or she is out of control, a physical incident or whatever, it's still something that's achieving what the abuser wants to achieve. And then the effect, and that's what I'm trying to get you guys to go to, you know, the personality and the behavioral issues that result on the part of the victims. PTSD, feelings of hopelessness, feelings of such low self-esteem. And when I asked you about, you know, how did the judge maybe observe the demeanor of these people at trial, that sometimes the victims, and yeah, typically, as Amanda said, typically it's man, woman, but, you know, there are cases when it's, you know, reversed, when it's gay, et cetera. But usually the victim does not present himself or herself well in public, at trial, et cetera. There's sometimes a sloppiness, there's a behavior that perhaps is explosive, and it looks like that person is the abuser when that's not the case. And the abuser or the batterer, who again is always in control, is in such control during custodial trials like this that he or she, mostly he, because the gender bias study talked all about it, tended to get custody. People used to think, oh, mothers always get custody. When the SJC did that gender bias study, they realized that really wasn't the case. And this was a case exactly like that. And notice that, you know, at trial, and even the SJC uses in its wording, sort of talks about Leslie a little bit derogatorily, right? Oh yeah, she did it too. But when you put it in the balance, what she did as opposed to what he did, he was the abuser. It took a long time for the courts to really get at, you know, the psychology of these relationships. And the reason why I do domestic violence and then we go right into child sexual abuse, they're interrelated because both issues are about control. Joy, you look like you're nodding away.
I was going to say, because I was getting like the sense that there was like an equivalency there. It's like, no, getting knocked unconscious is different than getting taunted. You know what I mean? And you know, not to mention the fact that he was a bigger guy and the intimidation factor. So, you know, he was clearly the batterer, and it wasn't. They weren't on equal playing fields in that sense.
And really what becomes the issue for the SJC, now the court was dealing with custody of a child that was loved by both parents, but one happened to be a batterer.
think at this point, like Leslie developed like battered woman syndrome.
Yeah, yeah, and that's exactly what I'm talking about when I talk about the personality, the PTSD, hopelessness, not being able to get, out of the relationship. As Stephanie mentioned before, the prior relationships, the whole cycle. You don't know what her history, I'm not sure if the SJC mentioned her family history or not. I don't think that they did. Yeah.
I think that the other part of it is probably unstable. I don't know. It just seemed like it would be an unstable emotional thing for the mom to be able to continue forward with.
To continue what?
Like because of her abuse, she would be seen as someone who at the time was emotionally unstable.
Emotionally appears unstable.
Yeah.
For many reasons, and then the person that appears to be able, willing, and more competent to handle a child, to have custody of a child, appears to be and appeared to be Ross in this case. And just exploring some of the reasons why the trial judge came up with custody for Ross.
Yeah. I couldn't put together when you were first asking about it, but now that we've gone over it, makes so much more sense, because they just get so broken down that they feel like that their whole life is that person, or that without them, their whole life is pretty much worthless or gonna fall apart. So, they go into the courtroom and they're just broken. So, and the other person's fine because they're just,
It's funny too, when we try to identify the characteristics of victims, and we talk about it across all walks of life. I mean, look, Leslie was making, at that time, $100,000 a year was like $1 million today. So this wasn't a woman, this was a woman that could have left him and still have been financially secure. But for whatever reason, she couldn't do it. Somebody else had their hand up when I was talking.
The other thing about in viewing her, the judge viewing her, you could see a court thinking really poorly of a woman who was sexually taunting him and running around nude. That they would, even had he done that, they'd judge the woman much more harshly.
So it's interesting that they have the whole history of all the things he's done, sent her to the hospital, all the restraining orders, all that.
Right.
And they just have that one instance of her, and that's what they focus on. For, that carries much more weight than all the things he had done over the whole relationship. And she's supposed to just sit there and take it and not do anything back at her.
So let's get to what the SJC decides now, and what repercussions it then has for later cases when domestic violence is brought up as an issue in a custody case. So Laura, what does the SJC decide?
They reversed and remanded it.
Right.
I think they said that the courts hadn't made detailed and comprehensive findings of fact on the issues of domestic violence.
Okay, say that again, louder, slower. Let's explore what that means.
Okay, SJC said that the lower courts had failed to make detailed and comprehensive findings of facts on the issues of domestic violence and its effect upon the child.
What does that mean? So what do courts after this case have to do in the future, and in what context? So you've had parties divorcing or parties like this that weren't married, and this custody issue, right?
Yeah. So you need,
go ahead. Yeah.
You need to understand when you're awarding the custody of the.
Who's you?
The judge. Sorry. When the court is awarding the custody of the risks to the child of prior domestic violence that they've seen and what they may see of future domestic violence, and the impact that has on them to whether their future, if they're going to be an abuser or whether they're going to be a victim themselves.
What does that all mean?
Child's psychological well-being.
What's that?
Like the child's psychological well-being from seeing this, like I don't think the courts would
So first of all, when and in what context does a judge have to make findings like this in a custody case? I mean, does that have to be a history of 209As? Does that have to be hospitalization, like in Leslie, you know, in what context does a judge have to do what the SJC is saying he has to do? I mean, is it only if a spouse or a alleged victim says, you know, we've been fighting, the history of abuse? Is it only if, you know, is it enough that a victim raises it as an issue in a custody case? Because what if, in a lot of instances of both domestic abuse and sexual abuse, many times, the only people that really know what happened are the abuser and the victim, right? So say it's not an instance like Leslie where there was, you know, actually, there were physical injuries at one point. There's documented 209As, there's police reports, but yet the, one of the people in the relationship is saying to the court, well, he or she is an abuser.
They need to find explicit findings on like the impact it has on the children itself, instead of just he said, she said, who's the batterer, who's the abuser.
But would a judge even have to do, go that route, make those findings? Is the holding helping? In what ways is the holding of Vaughn laying the groundwork for how, you know, future judges in future custody cases would decide these issues? Laura, you were just reading to us from the, you know, SJC's holding and rationale and, you know, what courts need to do in the future. Yet the SJC doesn't really give specific guidance, right? On, okay, if you have a 209A and you could offer that in evidence, then there's a history of domestic abuse, therefore if there's children involved, we've got to make findings. There isn't anything like that in the case. No. So what do you do? Suppose you represent the mom who, you know, they're going to be going to the custody trial. And she's saying to you, he wants custody, but he is an abuser. He's hurt me so many times in the past. He's always in control. He's also hurt, you know, the children have watched it. The children are traumatized by him. And I'm so afraid he's going to get custody. What do you do?
Well, I mean, this paragraph seems to make it be that in any time when there's a child custody issue in dispute, that the court would need to look to see whether there is a risk of domestic violence. It says domestic violence is an issue too fundamental and frequently recurring to be dealt with only by implication. The very frequency of domestic violence and disputes about child custody may have the effect of inuring courts to it and thus minimizing its significance. Requiring the courts to make explicit findings about the effect of the violence on the child and the appropriateness of the custody award in light of that effect will serve to keep these matters well in the foreground of the judge's thinking.
But how does the court know that there's domestic violence in the first place?
I think it's going to have to be alleged by one party or the other.
Can they talk to the child and hear what the child has to say?
In what way?
I don't know, like some type of counseling or just see what's been exposed and, I don't know.
How could the court be assisted in exploring whether and in what way children have witnessed domestic violence and been, you know, hurt by it?
Isn't that the job of a GAL?
A guy named Lightham would be, and not like Dr. Abruzzi in this case was actually an expert that was, you know, hired by both sides, but a guy named Lightham who would be appointed by the court, and that happens many times in custody cases, both in probate family court and in juvenile court as well. So the guardian ad litem will be appointed, and depending on the nature of the appointment, it could be an investigatory role as well, investigation and then recommendations as to custody. So that would help. The guardian ad litem report that I included in the materials was actually a case of mine, and I was the guardian ad litem in that case. And that was much more troubling, again, because there was no outward signs, evidence, et cetera, of domestic violence. You know, no 209As, no physical violence. And mom expressed or exhibited, you know, many of the characteristics that we just talked about. She appeared unstable, as Stephanie said before, for many different reasons. The dad kept loosely, the custody kept, by the way, kept going back and forth during the course of this case. You know, motion for temporary custody, dad gets, then mom gets, then at one point they're in the aunt's home, et cetera. But when dad, in the interim, when dad did have custody, he had a huge, like, board in the kitchen, and he had almost really every minute of the children's day accounted for. You know, chores and activities, et cetera. He would bring.
Planned out for them, you mean?
What's that?
He planned out their day for them?
Yes, yes. He would come to court and always had with him a huge binder. And in that binder would be, pleadings in the case and memoranda and, just, it was like a whole history of the relationship between him and his, I don't know if she was an ex-wife at the time linked to the GAO report, but they did get divorced. That's right. Some of the issues occur on modification. The children exhibited, and here we go, talking about the effects of violence on children, that are not that much involved in the violence in terms of, dad or mom isn't abusing them directly, but they witness it. And some of the characteristics go to, sometimes children exhibit and imitate the aggressor's behavior, and sometimes it's the opposite. And I saw that in both of the girls, when the older girl actually, imitated dad's behavior, and the younger girl imitated mom's behavior. But the case was very because of the abuse being not a physical kind of case, it was very hard to get your hands on, exactly what was going on, the psychology and the dynamics of it all. Sometimes they're more difficult, you see people that are, hurt physically, and of course it's a terrible thing, but sometimes the non-physical cases are really the harder to deal with, harder for attorneys, more difficult for judges and investigators, etc. This is very difficult unless you're totally in the relationship, or if you can follow it for a very long time. It's really hard to discern what's really going on and what effect it has on kids. Laura?
And I think a lot of times there's a continuum from like discipline to over-discipline to mental abuse.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
it's where that line is drawn. That's hard to discern.
Yeah, I mean, for years, both in the juvenile court and the probate court, prior to the Vaughn case, there was never any question about, if children were not directly being abused. There was no question about who the proper custodian could be. Whereas, you know, that's why Vaughn became a leading case. So if domestic violence is alleged in any fashion, and of course, the more evidence you could have, but it's not always the case. You don't always have 209As. You have, you know, women or people who are being abused that are afraid will not go to get a 209A or seek the 209A and then, you know, let it get dismissed. DCF at some point also started looking at obviously the issues of domestic violence as it relates to children. And so, for example, suppose you have, you know, we've been talking about the whole process of the investigatory process and the parent protection process. So, you know, suppose you have, and remember I used that hypothetical of police coming in and, you know, pulling the kids when there's a domestic situation, when, you know, say husband is actually, you know, physically hurting and beating the wife. But suppose as a result, too, of the abuse that's been going on for some years, the victim here, the abused spouse, not only exhibits characteristics like, you know, hopelessness and low self-esteem and whatnot, but begins also to, you know, sort of neglect, you know, what's going on in the home, maybe neglect children, you know, becomes depressed, etc. So you have DCF taking custody, you know, and putting, for example, in the service plan, oh, you get him out of the house. One of the items on the service plan. Simple as that. Probably 99 times out of 100, an abused victim can't and won't get to that stage for a long time. So that means the mom or the abused spouse loses custody, maybe 15 months down the line when the case goes to trial on fitness is still perhaps currently unfit. Maybe she's been going to you know, therapy and whatnot, but for whatever reason, the control issues, the financial and other issues dealing with control, she, again, can't or won't separate herself from the male abuser. So those are really tough situations when you have a CMP situation, different from the custody divorce type situations that we just looked at with Ron. So suppose you represent say it's the mom, Jennifer, and she just got the service plan from DCF, and amongst other, you know, get counseling, blah, 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 separate from spouse, or separate from boyfriend. What do you do?
Wouldn't you be able to advise Leslie to get the appropriate therapy in place for yourself and the child in order to plead to the court why you should have custody? Because if you could stabilize the child and basically have written documentation that you are a stable parent, then there shouldn't be an argument if you are the victim.
But suppose you represent a mom who, again, for some of these reasons, just can't separate from the abuser. Can't leave the house, can't throw him out of the house, you know? And now she's in danger of losing her children as well because of that. Because DCF's gonna go forward ultimately, and the case is gonna go on trial, and you're gonna, you know, what's that, Jonathan?
I mean, I might be hard or harsh, but I would say, I mean, you're pretty much picking him over your children. So, I mean, especially if he's abusive, it's better off for her well-being and future well-being
What do you have to say?
The problem is they have nowhere to go a lot of times, so their option is a shelter. It's not like they have they can just go to an apartment and have the money.
No, I hear you, I mean, it's,
But in her case, she's making money, she's making 100,000, so.
Well, you're talking about Leslie, I'm using a different situation now.
Oh, okay, just.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh,
Maybe she needs a little longer. Here's the thing, that if you're following strictly the care and protection process, you have the emergency hearing, the 72-hour hearing, blah, blah, blah. Case is supposed to go to trial in 15 months. That might not be enough. That might not be enough. You talked about therapy. Maybe she's taking baby steps, but it's still not enough really to get her act together by the time the case goes to trial.
so you would ask for a continuance? To
Protective
give her
order,
more time to
protective
talk
order
to
barring
her.
him from coming back to the house. I mean, if he was physically abusing the mother and the child, you may be able to get a
One of the
protective order.
cases that you have to read for the child sexual abuse portion deals with, the non-offending spouse, the mom, who did not, sexually abuse the children, again, losing custody of the child. So see how you have to know psychology and all? You can't just know legal standards to represent these people.
The only thing I could think of, if it was just anybody in a regular case, not Leslie, the only thing I could think of is asking for more time, and then at that point, as an attorney, I would advise her in this kind of a way that in order for you to be safe, I'm concerned about your safety, in order for you to be safe, here are the suggested recommendations of you getting the help for the child.
And by the way, not to interrupt you, but in the instances of physical violence, the statistics are very high that they're in the most danger, when they leave.
Because then what happens at that point,
Mm-hmm.
Especially if they're going back home together, there's usually a heightened amount of abuse that
Mhm.
occurs, like, oh, you told on me type, or you embarrassed me, or, usually from the abuser. But safety would be my number one thing, and I would ask for more time just to be able to have the client understand the repercussions of not being safe, and here's what could happen. And then, as Jonathan says, explain to the client that, you've got to make a choice between your husband or lover versus the safety of your child. But initially, you would ask for more time, I guess, to kind of help get in your client's ear, as to kind of, because at that point, the sense of judgment is wrong in the person's head, like
Yes.
it's off. So they're not rational, per se, especially going back into the home. That shows that their emotions are unstable at that point. But you need time to help them get to a place, if they're not going to help themselves, to the appropriate help that they need in order to make
Time
that
to
decision.
heal. And get away from the cycle.
Right.
And sometimes it never happens. Amanda, you were
I was
just
gonna say, the part about not being rational, I was gonna get after, it's almost like, it's kind of like a brainwashing that the
Mhm.
abuser does.
Absolutely.
So that
Yeah.
they're so, not in the same place that we all are,
Right.
they don't see it the same way we
Right.
do, because they've been in it for so long and they are
Right.
almost so.
It's like Stockholm syndrome, sort of.
Yeah, and they don't, and in many instances, they don't know how to protect their children as well, for example, the sexual abuse situation.
And all
They
along,
can't or don't know how.
all along, there's a denial in the abuse, the person who's being abused, the
Yes.
victim. There's a
Yes.
denial that this is all happening, and they don't want the
Yes.
family to be separated or
Right.
apart from each other.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that's the realistic point that
Absolutely.
you have to consider.
Jim? Oh, I thought you had your hand up.
No, I'm scratching my ears.
Jim saw some interesting cases in Chile yesterday, right?
That's a lot. Motion to suppress hearing.
A motion to suppress, yeah. All right. I would like to, since we kind of have a little extra time today, to actually assign the roles for the child sexual abuse assignment. I know you haven't read it yet, but that's okay. Let me grab a copy. Are those the extras next to you?
Yes.
So on the very front, where I have highlighted the various professionals, that's the way I want to divide you. Does anybody have an extra pen or pencil? Oh, thank you, ma'am. So I can jot down. Let's see. I think what I want to do is I want to double up and have, co-counsel, if there's enough of us, co-counsel maybe DCF. I would be looking probably for 2 attorneys because they're just heavily involved in all of the issues, and probably 2 attorneys for Lee, who is the father. If I do that, I'm just thinking out loud because there's 11 of you.
Did you count up Nicole?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, with Nicole is 11.
Maybe double up on the court-appointed investigators.
I would rather have that, well, I think 2 DAs might be better. Court appointed, one GAL, and then 1 each for the kids. That might work. Bless you. Okay, I have it. 2 DCF attorneys, 2 DAs, 1 investigator, 1 GAL, 1 attorney for Alicia, 1 for Jason, 1 for Jonathan, and 2 for Lee. That's exactly 11 people. So, any volunteers? Because I can just start signing. All right, I saw hands this way first. I saw Amanda, Jim, Mike raised their hands up first, and Stephanie. Keep your hand up, and, okay, so I'll give you preference, because you raised your hand first.
Alicia's attorney?
Okay, Amanda S. So Alicia's attorney. Jim?
I'll be the court investigator.
Jim, investigator, and then Stephanie and Miranda.
I be the DCF attorney, John and I. I'm
Oh,
volunteering.
okay, all right. John, you raise your hand for John then too, okay. Mike,
I'll be the GAL,
the who?
the guardian.
Oh, okay.
What was his name again? What's your name?
Mike.
Mike. I'll repeat this afterwards in a moment. So, Laura?
Jason's attorney?
I think these attorneys are the most fun. I mean, he's a terrible person, but can really get into the issues. I think Joe and Jonathan.
You get involved in told or something, so. Just like John was.
Huh? Yeah? All right, Joe and Jonathan. Lee's attorneys.
Yeah.
Jennifer and Jim, you have a choice here. DA,
Wait, Jim already went.
Yeah.
Jim. I said Joe and Jonathan
Jim,
were,
you got.
Yeah, I already went.
He's the investigator.
You already went.
You
He
need
did?
a spot,
I'm the
and then,
Did I screw up?
Nicole needs a spot that's not here.
You want
And
to add
Amanda
your
needs a
spot?
spot.
somebody else missing today?
No, you have 3 spots. There's
Oh,
2.
Laura, I don't have Laura down.
I took
I did.
Jason's
Okay,
attorney.
you took Jason.
Two
Oh,
DAs and
Amanda
one
over
John.
here.
Yeah, me. Where do you want me?
There's 3
Because
spots
I had
left.
Amanda and I forgot the other Amanda.
You have 2 DAs.
I have
and
2
Jonathan.
DAs and 1 Jonathan.
I'll do Jonathan.
Amanda Phillips. Okay, that, Jen, that means you're a DA, and so is Nicole,
Okay.
okay? So this case is, we're gonna go through a lot with the cases that you have to read for Thursday. So why don't you read the cases, and, actually, I can quickly explain some of the stuff in this packet too. So as I explained, this is a really, real case, it's really old too, so I, obviously, because you guys work as interns and you know the confidentiality, you know that, this case shouldn't go any further than what we discussed here in class. So, page 1, page 1 and 2, police reports, okay? Then we talked about 51A reports. There you go. Page 3 is your child abuse and neglect report form. Pages 3 and 4. I'm sorry, and 5. And 6. And 7. Now, page 8 was just a piece. At one point, the children had gone for some routine medical visits. You know, part of the case that, one of the reasons why this case had such huge issues is because there was never any physical evidence of sexual abuse. So they, this is just a piece of a medical visit that they had. Now, when you get to page 9, now you're looking at social worker notes.
Can I ask a
9.
quick question? please?
I'm sorry, yep.
The 51A stuff, is
Yeah.
that essentially what it still sort of looks like today?
Yeah, similar, yeah. I mean, the forms get updated, but, yeah.
In general
Yeah,
terms,
yeah.
that's what it looks
So
like.
9, 10, 11, 12, most of it, 13 are social worker notes.
That's the investigator.
Hmm?
That's the-
Yeah, but social worker as a, I'm sorry, yes, the 51B investigator, that also became then, you know, the worker for the kids afterwards. 14, remember I mentioned when I was going over the statute that in some cases, the 51As, the 51Bs, the service plans, they all go to the district attorneys. Well, here it is, the referral to the district attorney because it's an allegation of sexual abuse, and that's pages 14, 15, 16. And then some of the temporary
Report to
orders,
the-
I'm sorry?
Report to the DA stuff?
The report to the DA, yeah. Some of the temporary orders of custody are contained here too, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. You know, every time they go to court, they have to get a new order, 22. And then, who's the court-appointed investigator? Jim. So Jim, you're gonna carefully be reading these reports at the end, MSPCC. So this is you, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, and then there's an updated one after that, 32, 33. And then there were a couple other orders of custody at the end. So we're presupposing you've authored this report, and this is what you'd be knowledgeable about, okay? So this real case contains almost all the issues that you have to read about in the cases that you'll be reading for Thursday. Where's Laura? Laura, you represent Jason. In the real case, he was actually I know that he was over 10 when this occurred, but let's suppose that he's under 10, and I'll tell you why. Because when you look at when you guys read the statute that deals with out-of-court statements of children, it's chapter 233. Section 81 deals with criminal, 82 deals with civil, like termination cases, and 83 deals with care and protection cases. Well, what that statute did, once it was enacted, it allowed in certain instances, and you have to read the various, statutory language, allowed out-of-court statements of children under 10. So we're gonna suppose that everything that, that Jason's is under 10, and there might be an issue whether his statements come in under the statute. So keeping that in mind in your representation of Jason.
Is Alicia over 10?
Yes,
She's
yeah,
10 total.
yeah, so she's over 10, yeah.
And then the other child's really young, right?
Yeah, and Mike, you're the GAL, so notice when you look at,
Yeah, it
page
says
one of the packet, your
what your
position.
position is.
Yeah, yeah, okay.
Now, do I have to do like a GAL report?
No, but you will be representing what your, position is. You've talked with the kids, you're an expert in, custody of children, et cetera, okay? And you're a GAL, you're an attorney GAL, not a psych GAL, okay?
Professor Cole,
Yeah.
do we have to collaborate, with the GAL to talk about anything related to the DCF, being the DCF attorneys, or
No.
like as it relates to,
You could if you wanted to, sure.
okay,
Yeah.
I just wanted to.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Is, was Jonathan then added?
Jonathan is a baby, a toddler,
Oh,
and he's part of the care and protection case, of course, that represent, different issues, obviously. So we talked about that you might have different counsel, and that's why we have different counsel for the 3 children, because of the interest and issues that are different, as opposed to, Alicia versus Jason versus Jonathan. And once you read through the packet, who represents Alicia, Amanda. So Amanda and Laura, you're gonna see that both children recanted almost immediately. So their position as your clients is they want to remain with Dad. Okay? So that's your position. Amanda, you're gonna figure out what your because you have somebody who's baby. That, you could certainly meet and observe him and, observe him with Dad or whatever, but you have to figure it out because he's unable to tell you. Jim, do you have a question? No. All right, so we'll start this on Thursday and continue it into next Tuesday. Okay? Thank you.
So Justin was like a neighborhood friend or something?
Yes, yes.
Thursday, we're just doing the cases, and then we're gonna do the actual thing Tuesday?
Oh, we'll see.
Cause I have training Thursday.
All right.
I don't know, cause I won't be